The Alliance of American Football. AAF. AAF? So hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So I wasn't going to do any videos or anything related to it, but I thought coming off the heels not that long ago of doing that long video where I talked about the XFL returning and kind of my thoughts on that, I would probably do a kind of a companion video with the Alliance of American Football, AAF, which, by the way, I really don't think is a great acronym, but calling it the Alliance, sure. I can see right now already, even from the very beginning, they're already kind of really pushing the Alliance part of it is for the branding purposes, because AAF doesn't really roll off the tongue that much, but that's a minor quibble. But I did have some thoughts on it. There really wasn't too much to it. When I heard about it, it was kind of surprising. It came almost out of left field. I finally got around to having a chance to sit down and watch the opening press conference. And I thought it was kind of interesting to contrast it to what I saw when I looked at the XFL's opening press conference and the two completely different approaches they took to it. So I did take a couple of notes, and there are a couple of things I'm going to think about. It's not going to be nearly as long as the other one because I'm not going to make any projections or proposals on where I think this league's going to go. There are some things, though, that struck me as completely contrasting to what the XFL relaunch is looking at doing, and I really don't know where they're going to go with this and kind of where they're going to end up, but there is definitely some interesting things that they talked about. So for me, number one right off the top, it really came off as kind of a more professional, thought out concept. When Vince McMahon came out and did his bit on the XFL, it was just him. And the thing about Vince McMahon is he's a great promoter. He's many things. He's obviously a great businessman. He's done well over the years. But the thing is, he's not a sports fan. He literally just came out to hype up the league, but everything was kind of vague. Now, the advantage that he had going in was that really all he had to do at that point in time was to sell the idea that we're not going to do it the same way we did the first time because the XFL brand had a lot of baggage to it that I covered in that video. I'll put a link in the description and possibly in the card in the corner, I think. But the thing is, when you're looking at it from the standpoint of trying to sell a new product, the fact that he was going to be releasing it in the year 2020 instead of any sooner gives him leeway. You can basically just introduce the thing, talk about some vague items here and there, answer a few questions. You don't have to be super specific because you've got time. You've got time to develop the relationships you're going to need to. You can be super vague. And in that video, when I was talking about kind of what I think they should do or what I would do if it was me, I really focused in on the fact that as of the moment that this video is being recorded, really the only funding the XFL reboot is going to have is the $100 million that Vince is going to input into it himself. Which is a lot of money, you know, don't get me wrong, but to start a sports league from scratch, it's really kind of a drop in the bucket if you really think about all the things and all the logistics you need to set up. Now, where this one contrasted with very interestingly, and is that almost right from the top, you get the sense that they have access to more funds. And there are a couple of reasons why, which I'm going to get into in a second. But right off the top, you felt like we didn't hear about it. It wasn't expected. It came out of left field. But it feels a lot like they had been laying the groundwork for a while. Which also leads me to another thing, which I'll talk about later on in the video here in a couple of minutes. But right off the top, so you've got, and I'm just going to quickly refer to my notes as well. You got Charlie Ebersol, the son of Dick Ebersol, coming out as one of the co-founders, along with Bill Polian, who's going to be the other co-founder. And almost right at the beginning, they named off some executives that are involved in it. You got Troy Polamalu, you've got Jared Allen, sorry. Hines Ward is on the website. They didn't announce him in the press conference, but if you go to the website, you find out Hines Ward is involved in it as well. You've got Bill Polian, as I mentioned, J.K. McKay, who was introduced in the press conference, and Dick Ebersol is actually on the board of directors, and you've got Justin Tuck. So you've got a combination of football executives, you've got television executives, you've got former players. So right off the top, you're showing this team of people who have some credibility and some background in it. So you're not completely building it out of nowhere. We're contrasting to the XFL thing. You had Vince coming out there who really doesn't know anything about sports generally. Like, you really get the sense that he understands what he's trying to do, but to him the challenge is really just promoting this league and building something rather than being passionate about the sport of football. So the AAF really went to, I'm just going to call them the Alliance because I hate that acronym, but the Alliance basically sat back and really, as a branding thing, emphasized that we're aligning the executives with players, and then they're trying to really sell the connection to the fans. And there were a lot of little parts that they tried to throw in there. But right off the top, you had Charlie Ebersol come out and immediately almost defer to other people, including Bill Polian, who describes some of the rules. So I'll go over a couple of them here really quick, just so I won't cover every single bullet point, but I'll talk about a few of them here. So they demonstrated right off the top, basically Charlie Ebersol, before he brought Bill Polian out, talked about how there's an untapped market. Basically looking at the amount of viewers that the NFL gets versus the other professional sports, and then how when the season ends, they don't necessarily immediately convert to other sports. They kind of stop watching sports on television in general. So this is where they contrasted quite a bit, because they did focus a lot on the television end of it, and I'll get a little bit into that in a second as well. But the statistics don't lie in that. There's definitely an audience that isn't being tapped during those other months, and there is room, as I said in the other video, for like a spring football league. And there is some interest in it, and depending on how you do it, it could be interesting. But anyway, so after he went out there and explained that during the off-season part of it, brought out Bill Polian, they made clear, February 9, 2019, 8 p.m., they're going to have the game. And then Bill Polian talked about some of the contrasting rules that they want to do. They're really taking a lot of the kicking out of the game and a lot of the kicking plays. So no kickoffs, no onside kicks. Teams get the ball on the 25 just to start off rather than having a kickoff, which is fine. It doesn't really matter. Instead of an onside kick, a team can choose to go for it as a 4th and 10 on the 35-yard line, which could be interesting because, 4th down plays of 10 yards. I don't have the statistics in front of me, and I might put them on the screen if I can find them. But I'd be interested to see what the conversion rate is on a 4th and 10 versus the conversion rate of an onside kick. I'm assuming they've done a little bit of that math in terms of those numbers, but it does give a strategic kind of question. So as far as rule tweaks, they're not reinventing the wheel on that, but it is interesting to see them try. And I can see from a player safety standpoint, there is an element of, it is dangerous to try an onside kick because you have all these players running at each other trying to get the ball. And if everybody's eyes on the ball, the potential for collisions and different injuries, it's there. And then you've got these former players in there who can throw their 2 cents in, and really, either way, you're still doing a risk-reward thing with their version of the onside kick. They do no extra points, so you do mandatory 2-point conversion. So again, they're really taking a lot of the kicking aspects out of this. So no onside kick, no extra point kick, no kickoffs. 2 replays per team in the game for a total of 4 in the game. They can be used strategically by the coaches only. So this kind of goes into their aspect of it, which a lot of it does parallel kind of this concept of trying to develop a television product that's shorter. So they're targeting a 2.5-hour game time, which could be interesting. And part of that is having a 30-second play clock and basically reducing the amount of commercials by 60%. And what was the other one here? 60% less commercials, 2.5-hour target game time. Oh, no television timeouts, which I actually like that. If you're going to try to shorten the actual broadcast of the game, getting rid of the television timeouts is a good way to do it. That way you have kind of a more natural ebb and flow rather than artificially just, we're going to stand around for a couple of minutes while we're waiting for the commercials to play. In fairness, though, I think the 60% less commercials, while they're playing it up to be like a big thing, and I can, from a marketing standpoint, I get it. I think a little bit of that might have to do with the fact that if you're going to have a shorter show, you're also going to have less commercials, but at the same time, for an unknown property that you're literally just starting from scratch, I don't think you're going to be able to get as many advertisers. Or if you do, you'll probably get more bang for your buck selling less ad space and then maybe potentially making a little bit more per ad. But that's just me being a little bit cynical on that one. I think it is less to do with them wanting to reduce the number of commercials, although that will help with the runtime of the show, of the game. I think it has more to do with the fact that it'll be easier to sell the ad space for more if you have less pressure to sell so many slots. So just reducing the amount will probably help you with that, but that's just, I have no data to back that up. They announced CBS as a television partner, so they're going to have the introductory game on CBS, the actual mothership network. They're going to have a game a week on CBS Sports Network, or CBS SN. The championship game would be back on CBS. And they're looking at kind of what they call a 10-year business model. So they did introduce a couple of companies and businesses that are investing in the league. They didn't get into too many specifics, but they did emphasize that they do have other investors that are looking at a long-run view and a long-run business model, which is smart right off the top. I'm not in complete agreement with the fact that they went for television right away, kind of for the same reasons that I talked about it in the XFL video. But the truth is this: if you're going to do it, having a television partner that already understands that right out of the gate, it's going to be, you're creating a new audience. While people may be interested in seeing springtime football, you're going to have to basically prove to them that it's worthy. They did mention that they're going to pull from basically a college players. And then they emphasized a little bit in that press conference different elements that they're going to try to make appealing. And they did hit on a couple of the things that I thought about in kind of ways of doing other enticements. They are keeping the contract short so that you're only under contract for the season itself, which means if you're a really good player who's kind of on the borderline of the NFL, you can actually end the season, play well, and then latch on to an NFL team. So the scheduling, starting 1 week after the Super Bowl and then ending, I think, at the end of April is pretty good, because then if you're ready to go, you're already in game shape. You might be able to just go and smoothly transition into getting into mini camps or different things. Maybe you can latch on to an NFL team right after playing this season. So it could be kind of a semi-developmental league with other potential. One thing that I did catch that they made emphasis on was, as part of ways selling it to players, is that players who are at the college level, who are exiting the college level and might not be quite good enough for the NFL, they offer basically scholarships, depending on how many years you're potentially in this league, so that a player could take this opportunity to play professional football maybe a little longer. Play professional football at all, as opposed to just ending their football career after college. And then if you're able to hang in there a couple of years, then you've subsidized a potential scholarship, and it leaves you to opportunities outside of football, which is a good way of kind of selling it to players who, like I said, might be on that borderline between I'd still like to play football at a high level versus trying to just then make it in the working world right after the college experience. So it kind of goes into that whole providing additional value for the players. I suggested it as kind of a salaried thing where you put in the benefits. There might be some of that too, but either way, they're clearly promoting this holistic model, almost like a regular business, which could be appealing to some players coming out of college who don't already have professional football aspirations, but might be almost good enough, just shy of that level, which could still make for good football, because you're going to have some motivated people who are possibly trying to make it to an NFL roster that are good enough, but maybe don't have the exposure. Maybe they went to smaller schools. There's a lot of possibilities there that works into that. So those things, I covered that. They're advertising a $35 quality ticket, reasonable price. Again, it'll depend. And the other thing, this was a big one for me. Free game streaming on their Alliance app. And that leads me into this other piece that really struck me as a difference. Almost everything, including these things that they were talking about, this Alliance app, the television model, having these investors in place, really leads credence to the suggestion that Charlie Ebersol was saying earlier, that they had been talking for a year. So it means they kind of worked behind the scenes. They got all these people on board. They got all these things. It feels like they were a more polished product, which makes that 2019 number, which when initially I heard 2019, I was like, how are you going to put together a league in under a year? But it sounds like, and we're going to find out more as more information comes out, it sounds like they've actually been laying the groundwork, because almost everything suggests to me, if you've already got the television partner lined up and you've got a specific date and time that you're going to show the first game, it feels to me like you probably already have the cities figured out. You probably already know who's going to be running the different teams. You probably already know what venues you're going to be using. And that's huge, because if you already know exactly where you're going to be, when you're going to be there, then it's a matter of filling out the rosters. Well, you've got some time now to fill out those rosters, even though it's still going to feel kind of quick. It feels like there's more structure in place, is basically what I'm trying to get at, which is interesting. I really didn't think much of the Alliance, but the more that I got out of that, like I said, it's one press conference, and at the end of the day, you could say anything you want. But it felt like there was more thought that was given into it, and it felt like there were more serious people involved in it that don't feel like wasting their time. And if the television partner legitimately is ready to work at it with them for a couple of years, and they have investors who are willing to look at a longer term view, the fact that they have all these things in place and the fact that they're building an app, which is something that I specifically said I wouldn't do in the XFL model just because of the limitations of $100 million budget to build the whole league out of. It feels like these guys have more access to more funding. And if that's the case, then they can actually build an app which creates a platform for them, digital platform, for people to be able to see the games because they're streaming all the games on this app. So then all of a sudden you've got access. In the other video I said, reach out to like an Amazon for Amazon Prime or YouTube. You're finding these different potential partners to give you relatively inexpensive means to have platforms. But if you've got a free app that lets people see the games, you've given them that exposure. And then having a game a week on actual television on the CBS SN network, that's good. Having the debut show on the mothership CBS network, that'll get you some early exposure and potentially, basically you could be selling that app to everybody all throughout the initial game. You're trying to get them onto the platform so they'll be looking at it, and that can be your gateway. And then you really control the platform. I won't get onto it too much, but they really did make emphasis on really pushing into like an integrated in-game fantasy to try to encourage like fantasy football players. There were a lot of elements they covered into it, and I won't go into too much detail on that. But the interesting ones for me are the scope of the amount of people that are already involved, the amount of like what it feels like groundwork that's been done already. This app could potentially be very interesting if they've got the funding, which it feels like they do. In order to really launch an app, a proper app. So we're going to have to see how that goes, and we'll also have to see what the international distribution looks like. In Canada and other places internationally, do we have access to the app? Can we see these games? CBS, obviously, we've got it. We've got it on the television network. CBS SN, I believe, is available on a lot of cable and satellite packages in Canada here, but you've got to pay extra for that. But the truth is, how is the international distribution? I don't think they're worried about that too much. They're mostly concerned about the domestic. But having that international distribution could really get some additional eyeballs on it, which could be interesting to advertisers, depending on who you want. So I won't go too deep into that, but those are things that struck me. That kind of made me... they caught my eye when I was looking at what they were saying. So I'm just looking at these notes here. Player bonus based on wins, stats, and fan interaction. Okay, kind of similar concept. Giving additional enticements to players. But the other element that I really want to touch on. So now I've covered what was in that press conference that struck me as kind of interesting. Now here are a couple of silly things and a little bit kind of interesting subplots that struck me separately from that. One of them was Charlie Ebersol came out, and I kind of got a kick out of it. He came out, he had his jacket on and everything, and he came out with Jordan 1s on. Which is fine, he's a younger guy, it's not a big deal. But what I thought was very interesting about it is that Charlie Ebersol was also the one who was the director for the This Is the XFL 30 for 30 that ESPN came out with, where part of the documentary was an interview, kind of a sit-down talk between Vince McMahon and Dick Ebersol, his father, when they were talking about their time working together on the XFL project the first time around. What's fascinating about that is the timing of this coming out some months beforehand, the XFL announcement, and now the AAF. So the question is, based on the amount of groundwork that it feels like was laid, it feels like by the time this was being filmed and by the time they were doing this, Dick Ebersol probably already knew that his son was working on this project, because there's no way you can line up all these people this quickly if you didn't already have an idea in your head. Because these conversations take time. You can't just get people on board that fast. So my question, number one, and the reason I brought up the Jordan 1s, I'll explain in a second. But number one, Charlie Ebersol came up with this Is the XFL, directed it. Was this a trial balloon to figure out what the interest level was in a league like the XFL by invoking the XFL with Vince and with Dick Ebersol? Were they just trying to see if people still had some nostalgic feelings about the league to kind of gauge whether there was interest before they set up their own announcement? And then at the same time, I'm assuming Vince got at least some inspiration from that as well and ended up going his own way for the XFL relaunch. But it's funny that it feels like the two were talking about the same thing, but weren't necessarily communicating and might have been working on alternate projects at the same time. What's also interesting about that to me, and the reason I bring this up, is that if it was a trial balloon and he caught sense of the interest and decided to take that as a green light to go forward the same way Vince did, then By the time they were having that conversation, Dick Ebersol had to have at least known that when Vince came up with his press conference, I'm curious what the reaction would have been with the Ebersols, that knowing that they were going to release something that was going to come out a year sooner. That's kind of a little subplot that's interesting to me, because on the board of directors of the AAF is Dick Ebersol, who was the partner of Vince in the original XFL thing, and now Vince is off doing his own thing, and they're doing their thing here. The other element of it, and the reason why I thought it was funny that he had the Jordan 1s, is that another person who also kind of likes to wear Jordan 1s and things like that with suits and things is Vince's son Shane. And obviously I know there's no connection. Well, I think there's no connection. But to me, it would be very fun. If this had been the WWE right now, what would have happened is either in this press conference or an upcoming press conference, they would have announced another investor, and then out would have popped out Shane McMahon, and then they would have cut to Vince being like, you know, just keeping that soap opera going. I just thought it was very funny that both the children of both Dick Ebersol and Vince McMahon have kind of a similar fashion aesthetic. And hopefully somewhere in here I've put some pictures in so you can kind of see that. But it was very interesting to me that this whole XFL documentary that came out and was timed beautifully with both these announcements coming out one after the other. The architect of that, the director of that, is the person who is co-founding this league, which is now, I guess, in direct competition, but not really. What's going to be interesting as well is that this AAF, or the Alliance, is going to be first to market. They've already got the television thing set up, and potentially already got some sponsorships, some investors, venues, potentially. We'll all get the announcements in the coming months here to come. But in less than a year, they're ready to kick off, supposedly. How does the XFL respond to that? Does Vince continue and go forward and actually do it, knowing that now, potentially he already has a competitor for this spring football concept that is probably better funded now, already has television deal in place, so CBS would be out as a potential partner. Like, would anyone else even want to put on a competing spring football package with CBS putting some backing into this? And at the end of the day, I think the way that the AAF has approached this in terms of not trying to put every game on the network or trying to put every game out there all at once is probably wise, because the football level is not going to be up to snuff. But I have more confidence with Bill Polian's there to provide an influence, and with these player representatives / executives who have this experience. If they're as invested as they seem to be, there seems to be the right minds already in place for this league to succeed, whereas the XFL still feels like a nebulous idea where there is some money available, but I don't feel like they're going to have the funding that this one's ready to have. And this league, while the acronym isn't great, doesn't have the baggage that the XFL thing had, which I covered in that other video. So I think that's it. That's all I really wanted to talk about this. It is interesting. There's still a lot to be known. There's still a lot to come out over the next couple of months. So I'll be really interested to see what happens. I'll check out a game if I have access. You know, I have CBS and I can watch it. It's set up to happen 1 week after the Super Bowl, so more football is a good thing, and I'll be interested to see what kind of a product they're really able to put out there. But those are my thoughts. So do you have any thoughts on the creation of the AAF? You know, is it a competitor to the XFL? Is the XFL still going to happen now that they're set up a year later? So those are my thoughts on it. What thoughts do you have? Leave anything in the comments. I'd be happy to see what you think about it. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.